I had a dress steamed and a toast rehearsed when my sister deleted my name from the guest list like clearing a spreadsheet cell. By dinner, a new PDF labeled Final Seating landed in the family group chat with my seat gone and my line in the program replaced by family friend. I didn't cry. I opened my calendar and blocked out the wedding weekend for a trip so far away I could feel new air in my lungs just thinking about it. The first Monday of the month was unseasonably hot for Central Ohio, the kind of heavy heat that made the cul-de-sac smell like hot mulch and car tires. The local news droned from the kitchen. High school football highlights in the B block, a story about a church rummage sale in the C block, familiar background noise while I ironed the navy dress I'd saved for my sister Brooke's Friday rehearsal dinner. The text buzzed as I pressed the last wrinkle from the hem. "Hey Erin," Brooke wrote, casual like she was asking me to pick up napkins. "We're keeping the guest list super tight because of budget and vibe. Don't take this the wrong way, but we need nuclear family only at the wedding events. You can watch the live stream." I stared at the words until the steam iron hissed itself dry. "I am nuclear family," I typed, then deleted it. My mother chimed in before I could try again. "Honey, it's not personal. We've had to make hard calls. Please be gracious." "I was the maid of honor when we first planned this," I typed, then deleted that too. I don't know why I still thought a reasonable sentence would matter. By Tuesday after PTA night at the middle school where I'm a counselor, they had spun a whole new story that managed to make my non-invitation sound like a favor to me. At pickup, a mom in a Buckeyes hoodie said she had heard the drama from Brooke's Instagram, something about me needing space and choosing to sit this one out because weddings can be complicated for people. I smiled the way I smile at students when their tears look ready to spill. "That's not quite it," I said, and my throat went dry. I didn't say that 4 weeks earlier Brooke had told me the groomsmen count had gone up to 7, so I needed to trim my half of the bridesmaid party because odd numbers don't photograph well. And when I told her I didn't want to choose between my 2 closest friends, she called me difficult. I didn't say that our mother, who keeps her voice low when she's about to say something that will sting, had asked if I could give Brooke Grandma's heirloom veil early so we can make sure it's safe, then followed up a day later with a bulleted list of ways I had made this wedding about myself. I didn't mention I was the one who booked the church basement for the bridal shower and paid the $120 cleaning deposit out of my June paycheck because they said they were short that week. On Wednesday, I drove the 15 miles to my parents' house after work, past the baseball fields where kids in 2 big uniforms chased grounders under buzzing lights, past the corner where the Lutheran church posts a hand-lettered sign for Saturday's garage sale, past the coffee shop where Brooke used to study for nursing exams she never liked. I had Grandma's veil folded in tissue paper in a sturdy hat box, and I set it on my lap like an infant when I pulled into the driveway. The house smelled like lemon floor cleaner and the meatloaf my dad likes even though Mom says red meat isn't good for him anymore. Brooke's fiancé, Tyler, was there in a tucked polo, wearing the satisfied look he gets when things bend his way. "I came to give you the veil," I said without stepping over the threshold, my voice calm because if I let it waver I knew I would lose them and myself all at once. "I need to sign it over and get a receipt because Grandma asked me to document when it changes hands, and I want it cleaned by the place in Bexley that knows how to handle antique lace." "I already made you an appointment." "Maybe this is part of the problem," Mom said, brushing invisible crumbs from the table even though we were standing. "Everything has to be so formal with you, so transactional." "I organize things for a living," I said. "It's not a crime to want things clear." "No one's accusing you of a crime," Tyler said, and then looked at my mother like he wanted a gold star. "Well," Brooke said from behind him, soft and sharp at the same time, "actually, we do need the veil now, because the seamstress is doing a custom attachment to my dress, and the church wants a walk-through with decor. It's honestly easier if we keep it. We'll get you a receipt if that makes you feel better." Why would the church need Grandma's veil for a walkthrough? I asked, and she rolled her eyes. You're so literal, she said, and my jaw tightened. I held the hat box tighter and felt the stiff cardboard cut into my forearms. I'll bring it Friday morning to the seamstress in Bexley, I said. We'll meet there, and I'll sign it over then. Mom's mouth pulled the way it does when she thinks I'm trying to be difficult. You're creating hurdles, she said. You know, this is why it's hard to include you. Always conditions. We're trying to celebrate. The word include hit me like a cheap bumper at a bowling alley. You unincluded me on Monday, I said, and my voice shook for real then. You unincluded me with confetti. I went home with the hat box still in my lap and set it on my kitchen table next to the stack of students' mental health plans I was supposed to update by Friday. I took 2 sips of cold coffee and booked a flight to Savannah for the Friday before homecoming because I could get a decent deal into the smaller airport if I left early, and I had enough PTO saved from skipping spring break. Tybee Island was 90 minutes from the terminal if the rental car line wasn't long. I liked the idea of a place where I didn't know anyone, where you needed sunscreen in October and the air smelled like salt instead of wet leaves. I'm not an impulsive person. I make pro and con lists the length of legal paper, treat money with respect, because I remember exactly what I paid for my first used Corolla in college and how carefully I counted the dollars. But the click I felt after I pressed confirm on the airline site was like a door sliding into place. I put my phone face down and let my shoulders drop for the first time all week. Thursday at lunch, a former student's mom, who now runs a small floral studio out of her ranch house, knocked on my office door with a cardboard bakery box holding 2 sugar cookies iced like little pumpkins. I heard there's wedding dust up, she said, setting the box near my computer. I know better than to ask for details, but if it helps, the September Saturdays have been chaos for vendors this year. Everyone's overbooked, deposits are weird, and brides are telling us to just invoice my fiancé's business like that's how money works. I almost called your sister last night because her email about flour quantities didn't match her contract, but I decided to breathe into a paper bag instead. She smiled. You doing okay? I nodded because it was easier than explaining that my chest felt like it had a brick in it. Let me know if you need anything you couldn't ask for before, she said, and that sentence hovered in the room like a hummingbird I didn't want to scare away. The second weekend of the month, I tried to be normal. I took my neighbor's old husky for a slow loop around the block while the afternoon sun made the asphalt shimmer. I watched baseball on TV with the sound low, counted pitches, let the droning announcer calm me. I made a grocery list with boring items like chicken thighs and freezer bags and apples by the pound because that's what fit my budget. I avoided the boutique where Brooke registered for $80 cutting boards. At Sunday church, the pastor asked for prayers for all the families preparing for big life events, and my mother placed a hand on my shoulder at the coffee table and said, "We love you even when you make things harder than they need to be." I put the styrofoam cup down before I crushed it. On the last Thursday before payday, I stopped into the seamstress in Bexley with the hat box and the form I'd typed up with space for signatures, dates, and chain of custody, a phrase I picked up from our school resource officer and liked for its seriousness. Marta, the seamstress, wore bright lipstick and had a tape measure around her neck. I won't put scissors near this lace, she said softly after I lifted the veil's edge. The delicate points looked like frost. It has to be mounted under the comb carefully. It belongs to your grandmother. I'll only touch it if everyone agrees on exactly what I'm doing. I checked my phone. No answer from Brooke. No answer from my mother. Just a calendar alert reminding me to pick up a prescription for one of my anxious 7th graders, a favor because his single dad was working a swing shift. I'll leave the veil here in the safe if you sign for it, I told Marta, sliding my form across the counter. I'll text Brooke that it's here and give her your hours. She read the form all the way through the way people do when they respect you. I like that you get receipts for family, she said. It keeps the fights smaller. By Friday's dismissal bell, the family group chat began pinging again, a chorus of indignation like cicadas. Where's the veil? Brooke wrote. Mom said you were difficult at the house, and then she heard from some lace lady that you dropped it off without permission. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. It's at the seamstress and can be picked up with ID by the person wearing it, I typed. The seamstress will show you how to attach it without damage. I left it because we had no plan and time is ticking. There was a pause, then Tyler. This control thing with you is why we had to downsize our invites. My stomach clenched like a fist. I wanted to type that I was the one who found the seamstress when Brooke sent me a photo of a celebrity veil and said, find me someone who can do this cheap. I wanted to type that I'd called 3 churches when they didn't like the first lighting. Instead, I put my phone in the drawer the school calls the technology jail for confiscated devices and stood it upright between 2 slick plastic bins of fidget spinners. Saturday morning at 8, a knock hammered my door hard enough to wake the husky in the next apartment. I pulled on a sweatshirt and opened it to find a slim young officer with his cap in his hand and my mother on the sidewalk behind him holding her purse like a baby. Miss Hensley, he asked, polite but stiff. We received a call about a possible dispute over a family heirloom. Nothing criminal alleged, just a request for a civil standby, which basically means I'm here while you 2 talk so people feel safe. I blinked at him, then at my mother, who stared straight at my chest, not my face. The husky started his mournful howl through the wall. We can talk, I said, stepping back so the air from the hallway didn't make the apartment smell like someone else's laundry. I'm heading out soon, so let's be quick. You're leaving? My mother said, the way she says mold or interest rates. For a few days, I answered. The veil is at the seamstress with a form you can sign if you're picking it up for Brooke. I left it there because I didn't feel comfortable handing it to someone who called me controlling after removing me from the head count like I'm a folding chair. The officer looked at the floor. My mother pressed her lips together. This is what I'm talking about, she said. The tone. The drama. If you had been reasonable about the guest list, maybe we wouldn't be here. We're here because you dialed the non-emergency line to get a man with a badge to watch us argue about lace, I said, heart pounding but voice even. We're here because you turned family into paperwork, then got mad because I brought a pen. I left them on my porch with the officer's business card on my side table next to a bowl of quarters for laundry. At the airport, the security line wrapped around twice, a slow snake of rolling suitcases and early morning breath mint smell. I bought a granola bar for $4 and ate it standing up. On the plane, I rested my forehead against the window while the flight attendant did the demo with her hands. When the wheels lifted, the relief was a physical thing, like someone had opened a vent in my chest and let stale air out. I thought about the first time Grandma let us try on the veil, how she told us about her courthouse wedding during a snowstorm and the church ceremony they did in spring when the roads cleared. It isn't about the party, she'd said then, smoothing the lace with her palm. It's about who shows up. I scrolled to the photos of the veil appointment I'd taken for documentation, and even in that fluorescent light, the lace looked like patience. Savannah's air hit me like a warm towel when I stepped outside, heavy and sweet. The rental car line was manageable, the clerk efficient in a way that made me want to write a thank you card. I drove the 30 miles to Tybee with the radio low, a local station playing a call-in show about high school homecoming floats. I checked into a small motel with a humming window unit and a bowl of fresh lemons on the front desk, and the woman who handed me the key card said if I walked 2 blocks I could rent a bike for $20 a day and ride to the pier before sunset. I changed into shorts, stuck a 20 in my pocket, and did exactly that. On the boardwalk, a young couple took engagement photos, her dress whipping in the wind, his hair carefully arranged to look careless. I watched them for a minute and felt a pinprick of something like envy, then let it pass. The ocean made a low sound like someone breathing in their sleep. I let my calves ache as the pedals pushed back against me, and I didn't think about lace or seating charts or the way my mother said reasonable like a code word when she meant small. That night, after a seafood place served me shrimp with too much lemon and a baked potato that tasted like butter and salt the way it should, I opened my laptop at the motel desk and answered 3 emails from anxious 7th graders whose world was always collapsing and always being rebuilt. I told a girl who thinks her best friend is replacing her that people can be added, not just swapped out. I told a boy worried about his dad's mortgage that sometimes grown-ups make choices that feel like storms and that he was allowed to feel angry about the rain. I resisted every urge to scroll through Brooke's social media, left my phone face down beneath the motel notepad where someone had drawn a palm tree in blue ballpoint. Around midnight, a message from a number I didn't have saved, area code back home. "Aaron, it's Kara from Willow and Vine," the florist mom wrote. "I think I just became your involuntary ally. Call me in the morning. It's about invoices." My stomach tightened, but not in a bad way. I turned off the lamp, listened to the whir of the AC, and let myself sleep hard for the first time all week, knowing morning would bring something that felt less like retreat and more like the beginning of a plan I could carry without needing anyone's permission. Sunday morning, I woke up to the motel AC humming and the faint sound of gulls like they were pecking at metal. And for the first 10 seconds, my body didn't remember Ohio or lace or the way my mother said reasonable, like it had a lock on it. The text from Kara waited the way a small box waits on a stoop, ordinary until you pick it up and feel the weight. I called her while the coffee maker on the dresser gurgled like a small engine. She answered with no hello and the voice of a woman who has had the same conversation enough times to keep notes. She said she had an invoice for the bridal bouquet, 6 bridesmaids' posies that were now 7 again somehow, boutonnieres, a floral arch that cost more than my car's last repair, and centerpieces built around pillar candles the venue didn't allow, which she had pointed out twice. She said the deposit she requested in August had never arrived. She had then received a message 3 days ago from Tyler asking her to bill the business because it's cleaner for taxes, and when she declined and repeated the terms they had signed, he wrote that she would be very visible at the wedding and it would balance out, because he had friends with followings. He tried to pay me with exposure like it's 2010, she said, not laughing. And then she said she had phoned the venue to confirm delivery access and learned that the venue's event manager had a different contract file than the one Brooke had emailed around to vendors and family. Different load-in times, different number of tables, even a different ceremony start time, Kara said. Someone duplicated a PDF and changed parts and then sent that version to people. Do you see where this becomes a problem with candles and fire codes and stuff? The manager used the words breach of terms and then said she needed to talk to the couple directly, and that's when I remembered you were the one who keeps receipts and asked you to call me back. I sat on the bed with the phone pressed flat to my ear like extra pressure might push clarity into my head, and I asked Kara to send me whatever she had because I wasn't going to accuse anyone of anything based on third-hand chatter. She sent screenshots and forwarded emails while I set the styrofoam cup of coffee down because my hand had started to shake. The emails showed a contract signed by Brooke with the venue back in June that included no open flame, no outside alcohol, and no on-site promotional filming without written consent, which I remembered because Tyler's cousin runs a channel and had big ideas about content. The PDF Brooke sent to us last week had centerpieces with candles listed and champagne tower provided by couple, like we were in a magazine, and the delivery window started 2 hours earlier, which would save money on all the rush fees if vendors rearranged their lives. Kara had circled differences in red like a teacher. I clicked through them slowly and read every line while the AC clicked to a different speed. "You're sure the venue manager said the words breach of terms and not just we need to discuss?" I asked, and she said, "I wrote it down because it made my stomach drop." She paused and then said she had been to enough weddings to know how messy they get, and she wasn't asking me to fix anything, but she knew two things for a fact, which were that she had not been paid and that she would not deliver unless she had both money and a clear plan that matched a legal contract. I told her she didn't have to explain doing her job to me, and she didn't owe me loyalty just because I had once helped her son write a speech for science fair when his hands shook near microphones. And I asked if the venue manager had said anything about contact information, because I wouldn't be part of any more back channels that let people pretend someone else had invented friction. Kara said the manager would be in her office Monday at 9, and she'd be happy to talk to any authorized party, words that made me feel both very tired and very awake. I thanked her, promised to keep her out of anything that looked like a fight people wanted to make public for sport, and then I hung up and stared out the window at a woman in a sun hat pulling a rolling cooler behind her like a stubborn dog. The coffee tasted like warm cardboard and sugar packets, and I drank it anyway because it was there. Before lunch, I wrote a short email to Brooke and Tyler with my mother and father included, subject line clarifications and boundaries, because I wanted something I could point to later that didn't wobble. I kept it plain. I said I was not attending any event associated with the wedding and wouldn't be available for any roles, errands, or last-minute setups that a family member might typically do. I said the veil was at Marta's shop in Bexley and would be released to Brooke with a signed form that acknowledged mounting decisions and cleaning responsibilities. I attached the form for review and noted Marta's hours and address in miles and a landmark because my sister has a habit of pretending maps are difficult. I noted the wedding date the way it appeared on the venue contract back in June, and I wrote that any vendor communication should go through Brooke and Tyler as the couple, and that if I received messages from vendors asking for money or instruction, I would redirect them to the contract parties. I attached receipts for the church basement booking and the cleaning deposit for the shower because my budget needed that $120 back, and I had decided after half the night staring at the motel ceiling fan that I wasn't going to be shy about asking for it. I added one paragraph at the end that said I had learned there were conflicting documents circulating and that it would be wise to reconcile them now, and that I would not be part of any plan that involved pressuring vendors to accept visibility in lieu of payment because it was unkind and also foolish. I read it twice out loud until the words felt like my actual stance and not just what I wished I would say. Then I sent it. The response came fast enough to make my phone do that double buzz that turns my stomach. Brooke wrote first, and it sounded like she had spilled her anxiety into a glass and then passed it around the table. She said I was making myself central in a moment that wasn't mine to center. She said the different PDFs were not conflicting so much as updated for the vibe we landed on after learning more. She said she was sorry about the veil drama and would pick it up Monday with Mom, and then she said something about how if I kept escalating people would think I was trying to ruin her day, which told me she had already told them I was trying to ruin her day. Tyler added a paragraph about how business write-offs are normal and I wouldn't understand because I worked a government job, which made my face go hot, and then he added that the venue had always been flexible with him because he was connected. And he closed by naming Kara as a small community vendor who should be grateful, which clarified that he had not understood who he was dealing with and also that gratitude was being weaponized again. I left my phone on the desk and walked outside in sandals and took the motel steps 2 at a time until I felt my calves burn. The air was thick and I could taste salt and the rubber of the bicycle grips on my palm. There's a point where anger flips like a switch and turns into a plan because it isn't content to sit still anymore. I went back in, opened my laptop, and sent a second message, this one to the venue manager using the address Kara had forwarded, with just 2 sentences. I wrote that I had learned there might be multiple versions of a document, and I wanted to confirm the most current signed contract on file so I could route all questions correctly. And I acknowledged that I was not an authorized party, but was a family member trying to keep communication clean. I signed it with my school email instead of my personal one because I wanted the tone that address carries even if no one ever said it out loud. And then I ate a turkey sandwich that was more bread than anything while I waited. I didn't wait long. The venue manager replied after 10 minutes with a short, efficient note that included a secure link to the signed contract and the list of addenda on file. And she wrote that any changes required a signed amendment from both parties and a review by the church's safety coordinator, and she included the line that said the no candles rule was non-negotiable because of the old wood beams and the insurance rider. She copied Brooke and Tyler automatically on her reply, which meant that now there was an email string that included the words insurance rider, non-negotiable, and amendment. And it had arrived because I had simply asked for the document that already existed. Brooke's response arrived in the same minute and had that breathless tone people get when they feel the ground under them tilt. She wrote that the candles were LED pillar style, so it didn't matter, and the manager answered back that it did matter because an LED notation had to be on the layout to inform staff, and there was no notation. Tyler wrote that the champagne tower was decor only, and the manager wrote that decor was subject to the same rules as beverages if it involved glass and a raised platform in an aisle. Words that made me picture a slow-motion disaster of bubbles and slippage and one of our great-aunts doing a careful sidestep in church shoes. At 3 p.m, the first cousin texted me privately to say she loved me, but I should maybe sit this out because Brooke was in tears, which is always my cue to be quiet while other people turn my silence into a confession. I typed that I was sitting it out from 2 states away and that asking for the right PDF wasn't a betrayal, and she sent a heart and a message that said families are messy in a way that told me she was done being helpful. At 4, my father called from his truck parked at the hardware store where he buys screws he doesn't need for the comfort of small silver things in tidy boxes, and he said he knew everyone was tense and he wasn't picking sides. But it would be good if I could just apologize for the tone, which is what fathers who hate conflict say when they want the weather to change without moving the clouds. I told him I was not going to apologize for attaching receipts or for preventing lace from being cut by someone who had called me controlling, and he sighed the sigh of a man who thinks size can fix budgets, and he said he loved me. And I said I loved him in a voice that sounded like I was holding the phone with both hands. The tide rolled out and back in while I sat in the motel chair writing sentences I wished I didn't need to, and by early evening my email pinged with a message from the church's safety coordinator. A woman I had met at a rummage sale last year when we both reached for the same casserole dish and then laughed. She wrote matter-of-factly that she had received 2 different floor plans and needed to know which was accurate for fire code and aisle width, and also that the couple needed to produce a certificate of insurance for outside vendors that matched the contract, and that she was pausing approval on any decor until she had that. I read the line 3 times and felt something in my shoulders release like a knot loosening in warm water. I sent back a thank you that was just that, because sometimes gratitude is not a weapon but a clean tool. I walked down to a small place off the beach that served hush puppies that were too hot to hold, and I ate them with my fingers while baseball game 3 of the series played low on the TV over the bar. The inning stretched, 3 foul balls in a row, the camera cutting to a child with a giant foam glove. The man 2 stools down told his friend the team needed to stop swinging at garbage, and the friend said it isn't that simple, and the bartender laughed and said if he could get paid $1 million for standing still he would do it better. And the conversation soothed me because it was about something else and also exactly the same. I chewed, sipped water, texted Kara to say thank you for the way she had documented things, and told myself that I was not going to check Brooke's social media because I already knew what it would say. Monday morning came with a sun that hit the blinds hard, and by 9 I had a message from Marta that my mother had arrived to pick up the veil with Brooke and that the form had made things calmer. They had asked Marta to attach the lace directly to the dress, and Marta had explained that antique lace didn't love stitches, and they would mount it under the comb in a way that wouldn't tear, and Brooke had nodded while scrolling on her phone. "I have the signed paper with dates and your transfer," Marta wrote, and I felt that sentence like a cool cloth on the back of my neck. At 10, I had a call from the venue manager asking if anyone from the family could confirm delivery times for vendors because the couple hadn't answered her last 2 messages. I said I couldn't, and she said she understood, and then she told me calmly that if she didn't receive proof of insurance by Wednesday, they would revert to the June baseline plan. No champagne tower, no open flame. And they would bring in 2 extra staffers for aisle monitoring and add the charge to the final bill. I told her I appreciated how clear she was, and when I hung up I had that feeling you get when a teacher turns the lights on in a room full of people who thought they were still in charge of the dark. The week moved in squares like a calendar you can touch. Tuesday after PDA, I sat at my motel desk with the door open an inch for the outside air and watched a lizard do small push-ups on the wall. And my phone buzzed with a message from a bridesmaid I knew only because we had both once painted my parents' living room on the same day 4 summers ago. She wrote that she was sorry and that Brooke was under pressure, and she didn't agree with how I'd been treated. And then she sent a photo of a message in the bridesmaid chat where Tyler had written that if anyone heard from vendors, they should tell them all invoices would be covered by the business, and that if they had questions, they could talk to his cousin who handled media and partnerships. I felt my jaw clench, and then I felt my plan click another step into place because I hadn't built it to move fast. I had built it to stand up in a stiff wind. I told the bridesmaid thank you for trusting me with that and to please keep my name out of any conversation that wasn't stone cold necessary because I wasn't going to be the scapegoat again. Wednesday morning at 7, before homeroom back in Ohio even started, the venue manager sent a group email with Brooke and Tyler and the safety coordinator and the church office copied, and I was on it because of that first question I'd asked. And the message was 3 paragraphs long and all of them were calm. It said they had not received proof of insurance and therefore would be implementing the baseline plan. It said only battery-operated candles were allowed, and it repeated that outside alcohol could not be brought in even as decor, with a polite note about liability. She added a sentence that said staff had witnessed discussions about filming and that any filming would require written permission, and she attached a 1-page form with a place for dates and a notation about rooms where cameras were forbidden. I read it with my coffee sitting on the motel desk and my heart beating steady for the first time in days. Brooke replied with 3 words, "This is ridiculous," and then a longer message about customer service, and Tyler replied with something about flexibility. And the manager replied with a copy and paste of the signed terms and a sentence that said she understood how stressful this was and wanted to make it smooth for everyone. I imagined her typing it with her mouth set and her shoulders relaxed, and I wanted to bake her a pie and leave it at the church office door like a thank you note that cooled on purpose. At noon, Carrie from Human Resources at school called my cell to check on my leave request, and I stepped onto the balcony to take it, breathing in the heavy air. She said she had approved the extra days around the wedding weekend because I hadn't used any of my mental health days this semester, and she asked if I had everything I needed down there, and I said yes, just sunlight and a chair and some quiet. After we hung up, I scrolled a public county site for a minute out of habit and then closed it because I wasn't going to make myself responsible for every crack in this foundation. My part was to refuse to hold up a lie, not to demolish anything with my own hands. That afternoon, I rented the bike again and pedaled toward the pier where an artist had set up a folding table with watercolor postcards for $10. And I picked one with big brushes of blue because I wanted to mail my grandmother something that didn't have a form attached. I wrote carefully that the veil looked as pretty as it did when we were kids, and that I hoped it would be worn by someone who deserved it, and that I was eating hush puppies roughly the size of golf balls and sleeping fine. And I told her I would bring her a shell if I found a good one that didn't smell like fish. The postcard made me feel like I had stepped into a cooler room, and I dropped it in a blue box that creaked when I pulled the handle. I didn't know then that the next day I would be yanked back into the house I was trying to step out of with both feet. Thursday afternoon, the last Thursday before payday again if you trace the weeks, my phone lit up with my mother's name, and I let it ring because I was in the middle of editing a student's essay on The Outsiders. And they had written every sentence like it contained a secret, and then it rang again, and I answered, because the double call means something is on fire even if it's only metaphorically. My mother's voice had the same pitch it had when I broke my wrist in 7th grade falling off a balance beam, and she had to ask a nurse for help without crying. She said the church had called to say the rehearsal had to be scaled, which is a word you use for fish or projects, not a piece of someone's life, and also the venue had put a hold on access to the fellowship hall until a final walkthrough. And the videographer had sent a message saying he wouldn't film without the written permission that included a clause about the church using footage for its own promotion if it wanted. "They're saying we can't toast in the hall," my mother said like the world had tilted, and now Brooke is saying everything is ruined. And she keeps telling people you did this because you're mad about the bridesmaids. And I need you to say something to the opposite so people stop looking at me like I raised wild animals. My stomach tightened because there are moments where other people's choices make you accountable for the way you refuse to fix them, and this was one of those, and I wanted to be gentle and also very firm at the same time. I told my mother I had asked one question, which was for the correct contract, and the rest was people following rules they had always had, and she said she knew that in her mind, but knowing and feeling were two different rooms, and she had been stuck in the second one for days. Then she said quietly, almost as an aside, that Grandma had called her that morning to ask if the veil would be safe during the rehearsal, and Mom had wanted to say yes without thinking, and she couldn't. It would be easier if the story ended with me flicking a switch and turning off my guilt. It didn't. I kept my voice even and told my mother I wasn't going to post any statements on social media or join any chorus in any direction. I would, however, respond to any direct questions with exact sentences and no adjectives. I said if Grandma needed to hear from me, I would call her and tell her the veil was being mounted in a way that wouldn't damage it and stored upright with tissue so the comb didn't poke through. And I could even pick it up Friday morning and hold it until the ceremony if that made everyone less likely to break into hives. My mother exhaled into the phone like she was letting a bad smell out of a room. "You do that?" she asked, and I said I would, not because I wanted to be part of their day, but because I wanted the lace to be where it should be when people who hadn't earned it tried to tug. Friday morning, the rehearsal day, felt like humid cloth again, and the air in the motel room couldn't decide if it wanted to cool me or make me notice it. I drove inland with my windows partially down and picked up the veil from Marta, who handed it to me with a small smile and a copy of the form in a plastic sleeve. And on the way back, I stopped at a drive-thru for a biscuit because the edges looked like they were held on with flaking glue and I needed something warm in my hands. When I got back to the motel, I set the hat box on the desk and texted Grandma a photo of the lace folded like Patience and wrote I would keep it with me until an hour before the ceremony when I would hand it to Brooke directly if she wanted me to. And if she didn't, I would hand it to Mom, and if neither, I would return it to Marta's safe and attend to nothing else. Grandma texted back a single sentence, "Thank you for guarding what belongs to us," and it made my eyes sting because you can be a grown woman with a full-time job and still be knocked off balance by a sentence that tells you you're seen. I thought that would be the biggest thing that day before the rehearsal dinner, but an hour later my email chimed with the subject line, "Immediate attention, event adjustments." And the venue manager had written a measured paragraph explaining that due to failure to provide proof of insurance and conflicting instructions to staff from non-authorized parties, the church had decided to postpone access to the fellowship hall for any setup that deviated from the baseline plan and to require a new walkthrough before it would approve equipment placement. She wrote that this decision had been made by the church committee, not by her alone, and that it was meant to keep everyone safe and compliant. She added that the couple could still proceed with a simple ceremony with battery candles and staff-directed seating, and she listed times the sanctuary would be open. Brooke replied with a string of texts to me and then called, and I let it go to voicemail because if I heard her breath hitch, I would soften when I didn't want to. The voicemail said nothing about love and everything about logistics, and then it said one sentence that made my hand go cold. If you hadn't stuck your nose in the contract, none of this would be happening. I waited until the last light settled over the motel parking lot before I called Brooke back because I didn't want to be standing on a sidewalk or looking at my own face in a mirror when I said what I needed to say. She answered with my name like she was tasting it. I told her, in one long breath, that I was not the problem and I was not the solution, that vendors and a church office had all acted in ways that made sense given how they keep people from getting hurt and how they run buildings that outlast parties. That I had asked for the correct document because someone had to and then sat in Georgia while other people chose how to respond to their own signatures. I said I knew it felt like I had taken something from her, but what I had taken was the option to pretend terms didn't matter. I told her I would hold the veil until an hour before, as promised, and if she wanted to meet me at the side door of the sanctuary, I would hand it to her and walk away. There was silence, and I heard air move on her end of the line, and then she said, in a voice I knew from childhood when we had both wanted the last cookie, but also wanted to be decent people, I don't know how to do this without hating you for a minute. I said I understood, and that she could feel what she needed to feel while still not setting things on fire. She almost laughed, and then she didn't, and we hung up with a soft click that sounded like a door we weren't sure how to open. By the time the rehearsal dinner would have been underway with people clinking forks against water glasses and saying kind things into cameras, I was riding the bike down a side street lined with live oaks and little houses with porches that would fit 2 chairs and a table if you were careful. My phone buzzed with texts I didn't read because my eyes were on the road and because I am trying to learn not to be a person who reads while moving. And when I got back to the motel, I set the hat box on the dresser again like a small moon and took a shower so hot it felt like I was giving my skin a task. The baseball game ran late, extra innings, announcers talking about statistics I didn't understand in a way that felt like a lullaby. I almost closed my eyes when the call came from an unknown number in our area code, and I answered it because the day had trained me not to ignore things. It was the church's safety coordinator again, polite but urgent now, and she said they had just received a call from the county fire marshal's office, who had been looped in by someone complaining about overcapacity plans in a public building, and that they were pausing all non-essential elements until the morning while they sorted it out. We'll still marry them if they show up on time and sign the book, she said, reasonable the way a nurse is reasonable with a stubborn patient. But the party will be simple, and it will be safe. I thanked her again, and when I hung up, I sat on the edge of the bed with my hands on my knees and felt everything drop into place with a weight that wasn't ugly. The wedding wasn't canceled, but the party they had tried to inflate past the rules was losing air on its own, and my part now was to show up at the side door with a box and a form and a steady hand, and to keep my mouth closed when people wanted me to narrate a show I didn't produce. Then my phone tapped with one last message for the night, and it was from the bridesmaid who had sent me the screenshot earlier, and she wrote that she didn't know where else to send this. But the cousin with the camera had just posted a story tagging a different venue 90 miles away, a barn with twinkle lights and a dance floor with a harvest theme, and the caption said, "Plan B secured," and my mouth went dry. It was the first I'd heard of a second location, and the idea of them moving a celebration across county lines because they couldn't get their way felt like the truest sentence of this whole month. I turned off the lamp and lay down with the hat box on the chair like a briefcase, and I told myself that whatever happened tomorrow, I would not be baited into being the villain in their version, and I would not be a savior either. I would carry lace from one pair of hands to another, and then I would step back into warm air and let people make decisions with eyes wide open, and I would keep my head clear enough to see where the big truth was leading. Because if there's anything I've learned in schools and churches and living rooms, it's that the big truth doesn't need you to push if you just stop standing in front of it. I booked the last seat on a late flight home after the safety coordinator's call because I didn't want the veil changing hands in a parking lot with car doors slamming, and by the time the plane landed I smelled like air vents and coffee and wanted a shower. Friday morning I drove to Marta's with the windows cracked and picked up the hat box and the sign form, and I set the box on my kitchen table like a small task I could actually finish. I texted Brooke and my mother a simple line that I would be at the side door of the church at 1 on Saturday with the veil, and I would hand it to Brooke directly, and if she didn't come, I would return it to Marta's safe by 2. No commentary, no barbs. My hands steadied after I sent it. The local news ran a segment about high school homecoming floats while I made a turkey sandwich and counted the hours. The anchor talked about a garage sale raising money for band uniforms, and I wrote "band bake sale" on an envelope because I still planned to donate $10 when this was over, petty or not. Saturday came with that dull Ohio light that makes colors look like the labels fell off. I put on a plain dress and flats because the side door doesn't care what you're wearing, and I placed the hat box in the passenger seatbelt across it like a person. The church parking lot filled slow and uneven, groups of relatives drifting like they were waiting for someone to tell them where to stand. The safety coordinator met me by the brick steps with a clipboard and a calm face and waved me inside. "They're late," she said in a voice that wasn't a judgment, just a mark on a page. "We'll open the doors at the hour either way." I nodded and held the box tighter and watched people check their phones with their mouths pressed flat. My grandmother arrived with my father, careful on the sidewalk in nice shoes, her hand light on his arm. She saw the box and reached for it like it was something warm. "Do you want to keep it with you for a little while?" I asked quietly, and she shook her head and said, "You hold it until she asks. That's how you know whose day it is." Her fingers were cool when she squeezed mine, and my throat went dry. At 12:43, the group text that had been silent for an hour lit up with a bright sentence that didn't know how to be as urgent as it sounded. "Ceremony moved to Harvest Ridge Barn, 2 p.m. More our vibe," Brooke wrote, and then a link to a map that put the place 90 miles away on a 2-lane road where tractors live. I watched 3 ants squint at their phones and look at each other like they were reading a recipe missing sugar. The safety coordinator took a breath and said she would let the ushers know to release the sanctuary, and I nodded because there was nothing else to do. My father rubbed the back of his neck and said, "That's a long haul," and my grandmother blinked hard and said nothing. I stepped into a small side room where the church keeps the water pitchers and paper towels and called Brooke. She answered with noise behind her, road sounds, someone laughing, and I listened to her say it would be beautiful there, and there were twinkle lights, and they could do the champagne tower, and her voice hitched on tower like she had a pebble in her shoe. I said the veil would be at the church until 1:40, and then it would go back to Marta's safe, and if she wanted me to meet her at the courthouse Monday, I could bring it then, and I kept the words smooth as a table. "You're punishing me," she said into the phone, and I stared at the mop sink and said, "I'm keeping a promise. If I go chasing you down county roads, you'll call me controlling again." She didn't answer that. She said she would see what timing allowed, and hung up. I carried the hat box into the sanctuary and sat in a back pew where the wood creaked under me and the light hit the stained glass in a polite way. For a few minutes, I was just a person in a quiet room holding lace. At 1:20, Kara texted me a screenshot with no caption from a private vendor forum where managers help each other on busy weekends. The barn had posted a note about last-minute requests and how proof of insurance and fire codes were not negotiable, and a sentence about how exposure wasn't a form of payment they accepted, typed so dry you could hear the paper. My jaw tightened and then loosened because none of this needed me to push. 10 minutes later, the bridesmaid sent a message that guests were turning around at the highway because they didn't want to drive an hour and a half without a guarantee they wouldn't be standing in a field. I pictured old women with curls and men with sore knees making practical choices and felt something like a bruise in my chest. At 1:37, my phone rang with Brooke's name, and I answered and heard wind and someone saying left, and then her voice thin like it had been stretched. "We need the veil for photos," she said without a hello. "We're pulling off near the old drive-in. Can you bring it there and we'll hand it back after sunset?" The words made my neck go hot. "No," I said, and the word came out lighter than I felt. The veil goes from a person holding it to the person wearing it in one place. That's the only way I don't throw up later. I can meet you Monday at the courthouse. I can hand it to you at the church now if you are 5 minutes away. I'm not putting it in the back seat of a car on an exit ramp." She inhaled and the breath shook, and she said I was being impossible, and I said I was being precise. Silence, and then a small sound that might have been a sob or might have been the road, and she hung up. At 1:41, with the sanctuary emptying and a few ushers stacking programs into neat piles, I closed the hat box and walked it back to my car with my grandmother beside me. We drove together to Marta's with the radio low, a local station updating scores from early games, and my grandmother kept her hands folded like she didn't trust their weight. Marta met us at the counter, took the form, initialed the time, slid the box into the safe like it had always belonged there. "If someone comes in later, I'll be here till 5, she said, and the way she left the sentence open made my shoulders drop. Outside, the air smelled like someone had cut grass and left it in a pile. "Thank you," my grandmother said, and I nodded and didn't trust my voice. The rest happened the way trouble tumbles when it runs out of places to hide. By 3, my phone carried a dozen messages from people at the barn who said the staff had turned them away from certain areas and asked for waivers that didn't exist. At 3:20, the cousin posted a video that showed Tyler arguing near a loading door while a man in a county polo shirt pointed calmly at a paper. At 3:40, Kara texted that she had declined delivery because her invoices weren't paid and the barn wouldn't accept outside vendors without insurance, and she followed with a heart because she knew I would blame myself for not leaving well enough alone, even though leaving it alone never made anything better. At 4, my father called to say he was bringing my grandmother home because she was tired and didn't want to sit in a car and watch people decide how rules worked. "You did the right thing," he said, voice small in the cab of his truck, and I leaned my head against my wall and said, "It doesn't feel like a win." "It doesn't have to," he answered. I made soup because stirring calms me. I watched a late game on TV with the sound low while the box score crawled by like a slow parade. At 6:10, my phone vibrated with a message from Brooke, 3 words, "It's not happening," and then a longer one after that, "We're going to figure things out next week," and I could read the spacing and hear the pause between each idea. I typed, "I hope you're safe," and left it there because anything else would turn into a court transcript. At 7:30, my mother called to say people were asking what happened and she didn't have a simple sentence, and I said she could say the truth, that plans didn't match rules and things got too big to hold, and she was quiet and then said, "People want one person to blame. Tell them it was a group effort," I said, and she let out a breath that sounded old. Sunday morning church felt like a school hallway on a snow day. People spoke softly and put hands on arms, and no one looked me straight in the eyes long enough to make me feel cornered. The pastor said a prayer for families in transition and for couples under pressure, and I felt the words land like light touches, not heavy ones. After coffee hour, I drove to my grandmother's little house and sat on her couch while the late news murmured about weather and a lost dog that had been found 2 towns over. She asked me what I wanted to do with the veil, and I said it should sit a week and then we'd decide, and she nodded like I had given her a plan that fit in a pocket. "I don't want it to be a weapon," she said. "It's lace." "It's ours," I said, and she smiled without showing her teeth. By the last Tuesday of the month, I had washed beach sand out of the cuffs of my jeans and put my suitcase back on the top shelf and answered emails from 7th graders who needed help with speeches and lunchroom politics. I sent the church a thank you note for being clear under pressure. I walked past a garage sale sign on my street stapled crooked to a pole, and I dropped an envelope for the band uniforms at the high school office because even when adults make messes, kids still need uniforms. Brooke sent a long message on Thursday, careful sentences about disappointment and embarrassment and how she had let things get away from her, and a shorter line about wanting to start again when the air is better, which told me she had sat with someone sensible before writing. I answered that I loved her and I needed space, and that love and space can sit in the same room if people leave the windows open. On the last Friday before payday, I met Marta at noon and signed the form that returned the veil to my grandmother's closet with lavender sachets and old letters. The paper felt thin under my pen. I drove home with the radio carrying a baseball pregame show and pulled into my lot while a host argued about a reliever's ERA like it mattered to the price of apples. I put my phone face down on the table and sat with my back against the couch, and my shoulders finally loosened enough for me to feel tired instead of braced. My revenge, if that's what we're calling it, didn't look like fireworks or public speeches. It looked like holding a line when it would have been easier to be useful, like picking up a hat box and handing it over when the place was right, like refusing to set down paperwork because someone called me difficult. It wasn't clean, and it didn't make me a hero. But when I think about that Saturday, about the light in the sanctuary and the sound of chairs moving and the way my grandmother's hand felt in mine, I know I chose the version of us I can live with. A week later, the local news did a cheerful piece about a couple who surprised everyone with a small weekday courthouse ceremony and a picnic afterward with deli sandwiches in the park, and I didn't click the link even though I knew the names. I stood at my kitchen counter and ate an apple down to the seeds, and I thought about the month that started with a spreadsheet cell and ended with a quiet room and a safe in a seamstress's shop. I'm not the guard of anything more than my own boundaries, and that turns out to be a job that fills your hands. I booked a cheap flight back to Savannah for a weekend in November because the air there felt like a promise I made to myself when this started, and I want to keep it. When I wheeled my bag into the bedroom to make sure it wasn't hiding any sand, the hat box wasn't there, and that emptiness eased something in me. You can't hold a family together by yourself, and you shouldn't try. You just carry what belongs to you. You mark the time, and when the game goes into extra innings, you change the channel and go to bed, because morning is coming whether you schedule it or not.